The grand doors of the Laurent Conservatory had always felt like a portal to another world. For the girl, whose name was Elena, stepping through them each morning was an act of quiet defiance. The air here didn't smell of car exhaust and fried food from the corner shop below her apartment, but of old wood, lemon polish, and something else, something expensive and unnameable. It was the smell of history, of legacy, of money. She was a ghost in this palace of sound, a full-ride scholarship student. The words were stamped on her file and, she was sure, invisible on her forehead. Her scholarship was a miracle, a golden ticket pulled from a life of hard luck and second chances. It covered tuition. It did not cover the uniform of ease her classmates wore. Her world was a careful map of avoidance and observation. She knew which practice rooms had the slightly out-of-tune pianos that no one else wanted, and she claimed them gratefully. The sound was still 1,000 times better than the silent keyboard she practiced on at home, the one with headphones that made her feel like she was making music in a vacuum. Here, the notes breathed. She moved through the corridors with her sheet music clutched to her chest, a shield against the world. Her clothes were clean, neat, but undeniably from another place. A sweater that had been softened by too many washes, jeans that weren't the right cut, shoes chosen for durability, not style. She was a charcoal sketch in a hallway of oil paintings. The other students were a different species. They carried themselves with a loose-limbed confidence that spoke of vacations in the Alps and summers at music camps in Italy. They talked of master classes with pianists whose names were legend, of instructors their families had known for ages. Their laughter was loud and easy, a currency they spent freely. Elena's currency was silence. She listened. She absorbed. She heard the conversations that weren't meant for her. It happened in the common room, a space she usually skirted. She was rushing to return a score to the library, cutting through to save time. A group of them were clustered around the grand piano, a beautiful, gleaming beast. One boy, with carefully messy hair and a sweater tied around his shoulders, was playing a dazzling, complicated run from a Prokofiev concerto. It was all sparks and lightning. His friends applauded. Thanks, he said, waving a dismissive hand. Just working out the kinks. Thorne says my attack in the third movement is still too polite. A girl with a perfect ballet bun leaned against the piano. Ugh, Thorne. He eviscerated me yesterday over my Chopin. Said my rubato was emotional indigestion. They laughed, a shared, comfortable laugh of people who could afford to be criticized by the best. Elena tried to slip past. Eyes down. The boy at the piano noticed her. His eyes flickered over her, taking in the worn binder, the practical shoes. The room didn't go quiet, but the energy shifted. It became cooler. Hey, he said, not unkindly, but with the curiosity one might show a strange insect. You're in Thorne's studio too, right? The scholarship kid. Elena stopped. She felt her neck grow warm. She gave a small, tight nod. What are you working on? The girl with the bun asked. There was no malice in the question, only a bland, distant interest. Elena's voice, when she found it, was softer than she wanted. Schumann, Kinderschen and scenes from childhood The boy at the piano smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. It was the smile of someone solving a simple puzzle. Right, of course. Accessible pieces. Good choice. The word hung in the air. Accessible. It wasn't a compliment. It meant simple. It meant basic. It meant for beginners. Another boy, who had been silent, chimed in. My little sister played Trumere for her grade 3 exam. Sweet little piece. They weren't trying to be cruel. That was the thing. Their mockery was so casual, so woven into the fabric of their reality, that they didn't even recognize it as such. To them, they were just stating facts. She was from a different planet, and she was playing its simple music. Elena felt the heat in her neck spread to her cheeks. She managed another nod and almost fled from the room. Their laughter, now about something else, followed her into the hall. It wasn't the Prokofiev that stung. It was the word accessible. It was the memory of her mother, hands raw from cleaning offices, saving for 3 years to buy her that second-hand upright piano that now filled their tiny living room. That piano was a universe. It was not accessible. It was everything. Her sanctuary was her assigned practice room in the old wing room 11B. It was small, with a window that looked out onto a brick wall, and it housed a piano that was notoriously stubborn, its middle C having a faint, dull buzz. She loved it fiercely. Here, she was alone. Here, she could play the folk songs her abuela had taught her. Melodies that spun stories of a homeland she'd never seen, of joy and sorrow that felt more real than anything in the glossy brochures of the conservatory. Her lesson with Professor Thorne was the weekly trial. His studio was vast, with a concert grand that seemed to swallow the light. He was a tall, elegant man with fingers that looked like they were born to shape sound. He listened to her play her assigned etudes with an expression of polite endurance. "Your technique is adequate," he said one afternoon, after she'd finished a Brahms intermezzo. He paced slowly behind her. "You have a certain rhythmic diligence. But music, Miss Vasquez, is not merely about correct notes. It is about architecture. It is about grandeur. It is about a conversation with history. You must learn to speak the language." He stopped and looked at her, really looked at her, as if seeing her for the first time. "You are a hard worker. That is commendable. But this path," he gestured to the grand piano, to the portraits of great composers on the walls, "requires more than hard work. It requires a lineage, a context. Have you considered the pedagogy program? Training to teach can be a very noble and stable profession." The suggestion was a door gently but firmly closed. He was telling her, kindly, that she did not belong on the stage. She belonged behind a desk, instructing children in accessible pieces. She packed her music without a word. What could she say? That her lineage was in her abuela's songs? That her context was the silence of a sleeping neighborhood, broken only by the sound of her piano drifting into the night? That would sound like poetry, and this was a place of cold, hard facts. That night, back in her apartment, the city sounds a constant hum through the thin walls. She sat at her old upright. The flyer for the Chancellor's soloist audition was pinned to the wall beside it. The winner would perform with the city's symphony. It was a dream so big it felt foolish to even look at it. She placed her hands on the keys, cool and familiar. She didn't play Schumann or Brahms. She played one of her abuela's songs. It was a melody of longing and memory, simple in its structure, bottomless in its feeling. As she played, the faces of the students, the words of Professor Thorne, the feeling of being a ghost in the grand halls, all of it folded into the music. She finished, the last note fading into the sound of distant traffic. She wasn't angry. She was resolved. A slow, steady fire had been lit. They thought they knew what power sounded like. They thought it was all lightning and storm. She looked at the flyer again. Then she looked at her hands. She would show them. She would show them that the deepest power wasn't in the roar. Sometimes, it was in the whisper you had to lean in close to hear. And she had a lot to say. The flyer for the Chancellor's soloist audition was a simple piece of paper, but it seemed to glow on the conservatory's main bulletin board. It was pinned right in the center, surrounded by notices for used sheet music sales and orchestra tryouts. For days, Elena walked past it, her eyes darting over the words before she quickly looked away. It felt like looking directly at the sun. The winner will perform as featured soloist with the National Symphony Orchestra. At the season finale, those words were a different language, a language spoken in the big, sunlit rooms of the world, not in practice rooms with buzzing middle C's. She could hear the other students talking about it. The air in the halls crackled with a new kind of energy, a competitive hum. It was all anyone discussed in the common room or between classes. "My father knows the conductor," she heard one boy say confidently. "Not that it matters, of course, but it's good to have a familiar face in the room. I'm finally ready for the Prokofiev," another said, cracking his knuckles. "Thorne says if I can get the cadenza up to speed, it'll be undeniable." Elena listened, her stomach a tight knot. The pieces they named were titans of the piano world, loud, difficult, show-stopping concertos designed to stun an audience into submission. They were pieces that demanded to be heard. Her Kinderchen and asterisk was a collection of quiet moments. It asked to be remembered. The deadline to sign up was Friday. On Thursday evening, she sat in room 11B, not practicing, just staring at the stubborn piano. The faint buzz of the middle C was a familiar friend now. She thought about Professor Thorne's suggestion about the teaching program. It was sensible. It was safe. It was a life she could picture, a small studio, beginner students, the steady satisfaction of passing on knowledge. There would be no mocking whispers there, no feeling of being a ghost. But then she thought of her abuela, who had worked in a garment factory for 40 years, whose hands were twisted, but whose voice was pure honey when she sang those old songs. She had never had a choice about her path. Elena had this one, wild, improbable choice right in front of her. On Friday morning, just before the lunch cutoff, she went to the administrative office. The secretary, A kind-eyed woman who always remembered everyone's name smiled at her. "Ah, Elena, here for the practice room schedule?" "No," Elena said, her voice barely above a whisper. She cleared her throat. "For the audition. I'd like to put my name down, please." The secretary's smile widened, genuine and warm. "Of course, dear. Good for you." She slid the clipboard across the desk. Elena signed her name at the bottom of a list of about 20 others. The names above hers were written with bold, looping scripts. Hers looked small and careful. The news traveled fast. She wasn't sure how, but by her afternoon music theory class, she felt the change. No one said anything directly to her, but there were looks. A few raised eyebrows. A couple of students she didn't know glanced at her and then leaned together, speaking in low tones. It wasn't the open mockery of the common room that day. This was quieter, more puzzled. It was the feeling of a puzzle piece being forced into the wrong spot. The real test came during her weekly lesson with Professor Thorne later that day. She had prepared the first movement of a Mozart sonata, playing it with a clean, precise touch. He listened, his eyes closed, his head nodding slightly with the rhythm. When she finished, he was silent for a moment. "Better," he said, opening his eyes. The phrasing in the second theme was less wooden. "There is progress." He made a few notes in his book. "I see you've put your name in for the Chancellor's audition." Elena's hands, resting in her lap, tightened. "Yes, Professor. HMM." He took off his glasses and polished them with a cloth. "And what have you selected to play?" "One of the Mozart concerti. Perhaps the K488? It would suit your lyrical tendencies, though the orchestration is quite demanding." This was the moment. She took a slow breath. "I've chosen Schumann's T. Riumere, from Kinderschen and asterisk." The room went very still. Professor Thorne stopped polishing his glasses. He put them back on, looking at her not as a student, but as a scientist might look at a baffling specimen. "Trumere," he repeated, the word flat. "A 3-minute reverie. It's part of the larger set," Elena offered, her voice small. "I am aware of what it is part of," he said, a touch of impatience in his tone. He leaned forward, placing his elbows on his knees. "Elena, these auditions, they are not like our little studio classes. The panel is looking for a performer who can command a stage, fill a hall, engage a massive orchestra. They need to see range, power, stamina. Trumere is a beautiful miniature. It is a snapshot. This stage demands an epic painting." He spoke slowly, as if explaining a basic truth to a child. "It is a charming parlor piece, Miss Vasquez, perfect for a gentle evening at home. But this is the major leagues. This stage demands a storm, not a lullaby." He sighed, a sound of genuine, if condescending, concern. "I admire your affection for the piece, but affection is not a strategy. You will be eaten alive. The other contestants will be playing Rachmaninoff and Tchaikovsky. You will be playing a piece children learn." Each word was a gentle tap of a hammer, nailing shut the coffin of her hope. He was only saying what everyone else was thinking. She was out of her depth. She was making a fool of herself. Elena looked down at her hands. They were good hands, strong from years of practice on stiff actions. They knew the weight of every key on her old upright at home. They knew how to find the song in the silence. She thought of the folk melodies, how their power wasn't in volume, but in truth. She thought of the feeling she got when she played Trumere, not as an exercise, but as a memory of something sweet and lost. She looked up. Professor Thorne was watching her, expecting retreat, expecting the sensible scholarship student to bow to his expertise. For the first time in that grand, intimidating room, she didn't feel like a ghost. She felt a spark of the same defiance that had made her sign the clipboard that morning. "With respect, Professor," she said, and her voice didn't shake. It was quiet, but clear as the first note of the day in a silent room. "I believe I understand the piece." He blinked, surprised, not angry, just deeply surprised. He studied her face, seeing not defiance, but a strange certainty. He leaned back in his chair, the leather sighing beneath him. "Understanding is one thing," he said, his tone cooler now. The teacher-student dynamic had shifted, slightly but permanently, conveying that understanding across a vast concert hall, past a panel of weary experts, and in competition with fireworks. "That is another." "But," he shrugged, a gesture of dismissal, "it is your name on the list. The choice, and its consequences, are yours." The lesson was over. As she gathered her music, he spoke once more, without looking at her. "You will need to make it speak, Elena, not just whisper. It will have to shout without ever raising its voice. A very difficult trick, She walked out of his studio, her heart pounding not with fear, but with a fierce, focused energy. He had given her the challenge, even if he meant it as a dismissal. Make it speak. She went straight to room 11B. She didn't play anything. She sat on the bench and opened the Schumann score to Traumerei. She looked at the simple lines of music, the gentle rises and falls. It wasn't just notes on a page anymore. It was a battlefield, a quiet, 3-minute battlefield where she would have to fight for every ounce of feeling, every moment of connection. They wanted a storm? She would show them the power in the calm eye of the hurricane. They thought she was bringing a lullaby to a war of decibels. She placed her fingers on the keys, on that familiar, slightly buzzing middle C. She didn't press down. She just felt the potential under her skin. The real work began now, not just practicing, but digging. She had to find the storm inside the lullaby, and for the first time, she believed, truly believed, that it was there. The world outside the conservatory seemed to fade into a soft blur. The city's noises, the chatter of her classmates, even the well-meaning questions from her mother about how her day was, it all became background, static. Elena's mind was now a funnel, and everything poured into one single point, the story within the notes of Traumerei. Professor Thorne's words, make it speak, had become her mission. But first, she had to learn its language. She spent hours not at the piano, but in the conservatory's hushed library, a place that smelled of dust and old paper. She hunted for biographies of Robert Schumann. She found letters he wrote to his wife, Clara, another brilliant pianist. She read about his life, his struggles with a strange buzzing in his ears that grew into full symphonies, his deep love, his fragile mind, his eventual descent into darkness. She learned that Kinderschen wasn't written for children, but about childhood. It was a grown man looking back through a distant, tender lens at a world of simple feelings that he could no longer touch. Traumerei meant dreaming. It wasn't just a daydream. It was the act of slipping away from the present, into a memory so sweet it ached. This changed everything. It wasn't a simple, pretty tune anymore. It was a ghost, a beautiful, sad ghost of a lost and simpler time. Now, when she sat at the stubborn piano in room 11B, she wasn't just playing notes. She was trying to conjure a feeling. She played the opening phrase, that gentle, climbing melody. She tried to imagine Schumann as a boy, staring out a window, his mind somewhere far away, but it felt thin. It wasn't her memory. Then she thought of her abuela. Back in her home country as a little girl, she thought of the stories of running through fields of flowers that seemed to stretch forever, a place her abuela could never return to. The melody suddenly had a home. It had the scent of those imaginary flowers and the bittersweet tang of permanent goodbye. This was her way in. She didn't have memories of grand European tours or summer music festivals, but she had her abuela's lullabies. She had the memory of her mother's exhausted smile when she played her first complete song. She had the feeling of her small family in their small apartment, creating a world of their own against the noise of the city. That was her childhood. That was her dreaming. The technical work became a deep, almost spiritual excavation. Every note, every pause, every shift of the pedal was a conscious choice. The piece is famously forgiving to beginners. Its slow tempo and clear melody make it seem easy. But that, she realized, was the trap. Its simplicity was a wall. Anyone could play the notes. The task was to make people forget they were hearing notes at all. She obsessed over the silence, the little rest after the first phrase. That silence wasn't empty. It was where the feeling of the first note lingered and bloomed before the next one arrived. She practiced making that silence feel alive, full of the echo of what had just been and the promise of what was to come. The dynamics, the softs and louds were printed on the page. Piano, soft, pianissimo, very soft. But she went further. She practiced playing so softly that the sound was almost a thought, a secret told directly into the piano strings. Then, the slight swell in the middle, the crescendo. It couldn't sound like getting louder. It had to feel like the heart tightening, a memory rushing back with sudden, overwhelming clarity, and then fading again, because you can't hold on to a dream forever. Her life took on a strange rhythm. At the conservatory, she was a shadow, slipping into 11B before dawn and leaving long after most students had gone out for expensive coffees. She avoided the common room. She ate her packed lunch on a bench by the service entrance, listening to recordings of great pianists playing not just Traumerei, but other slow, emotional pieces. She listened to singers, to how they breathed life into a long, held note. At home, Her practice was different. The old upright in the living room had a warmer, duller sound. Here, she played without fear of being overheard and judged. Here, she could let the feeling take over. Sometimes she would play the piece over and over for an hour, not to fix a mistake, but to live inside it, each time trying to find a deeper layer of that aching sweetness. Her mother would often pause from her chores, sitting quietly on the worn sofa with her mending in her lap, just listening. She never said anything like, "That sounds technical," or "Your speed is improving." Once, after a particularly quiet, stretching rendition, her mother simply said, "That one sounds like a goodbye." Elena had stopped, her hands freezing above the keys. Her mother had heard it. She had found the core. One rainy afternoon, a breakthrough came not from thinking, but from exhaustion. She had been practicing for 4 hours straight, and her hands were tired. She leaned forward, resting her forehead against the cool wood of the piano in room 11B. She was so tired of fighting, of trying to prove something. She thought, what if I just stop trying? What if I just play it for Abuela? She sat up, took a breath that felt like it came from her toes, and let her hands find the keys. She didn't think about Schumann, or Thorn, or the audition panel. She thought of her abuela's face, lined with years of hard work, smiling as she sang. She thought of the dream of those faraway fields. Her hands moved. The melody floated out, but it was different. It was slower, more spacious. The notes weren't separate pearls on a string. They bled into one another, connected by the pedal and by something deeper, an unbroken thread of feeling. The famous, sighing middle section didn't swell with forced drama. It just opened like a flower in slow motion, revealing a center of profound sadness before gently closing again. The final, fading chords didn't just end. They dissolved, leaving a silence that felt heavy with meaning. When she finished, the familiar buzz of the middle C was the only sound. She felt empty, but in a clean way. She had poured something out. A small sound made her jump. She turned. Standing in the doorway of 11B was the janitor, an older man with a kind, weathered face who she saw every evening, but had never spoken to. He was holding his mop and bucket, paused in his work. He looked embarrassed to be caught listening. "Sorry, miss," he mumbled, starting to turn away. "It's okay," she said quickly. He nodded toward the piano. "My wife, she used to play that one. Before she got sick." He was quiet for a second, his eyes distant. "Haven't heard it like that in a long time." Sounded real. He gave her a small, awkward nod and moved on down the hall. The wheels of his bucket squeaking. Elena sat very still. Her heart was pounding. Sounded real. It was the best review she could have ever gotten. It wasn't about technique or tradition or being impressive. It was about being real. The other students were practicing their concertos. She could hear them sometimes, torrents of notes cascading from the premium practice rooms. They sounded like giants striding across the earth. She felt small beside them, a single person whispering a story in a crowded room. But now, she knew her weapon. It wasn't complexity. It was clarity. It wasn't volume. It was vulnerability. They were building skyscrapers of sound. She was polishing a single, perfect diamond, aiming to make it catch the light in such a way that it would blind you with its truth. The day of the audition was now a real thing on the calendar, creeping closer. The knot of fear in her stomach was still there, but it was tied around this new, hard-won certainty. She wasn't going to compete with their storms. She was going to offer a single, perfect drop of rain, and hope that in its reflection, the audience could see the whole sky. The day of the Chancellor's audition dawned gray and damp. Elena woke up before her alarm, the silence of the apartment feeling heavier than usual. Today was the day. The simple thought sat in her stomach like a stone. She dressed with careful, slow movements, putting on the one dress she owned that felt close to concert attire, a dark blue, simple piece her mother had found on sale years ago. It was a little too short now, but it was clean and it felt like hers. Her mother was already in the kitchen, the smell of strong coffee and toast filling the small space. She didn't say "good luck" or "you'll be great." She just put a plate in front of Elena and rested a hand on her shoulder for a long moment, the warmth and weight of it saying everything. They ate in quiet companionship, the only sound the clink of a knife and the distant rumble of the city waking up. The walk to the conservatory felt different. Every step seemed loud. The grand building, usually a place of routine, now loomed like a fortress she had to breach. The main auditorium, the Piers Hall, was where it would happen. She had never performed there before. She'd only ever slipped in at the back to watch others. Backstage was a world of controlled chaos and tense quiet. Other contestants were there, looking like elegant, sharpened versions of themselves. The boys in crisp suits, the girls in sleek black dresses. They stretched their fingers, paced in small circles, or sat with eyes closed, their lips moving silently as they mentally raced through their concertos. The air smelled of rosin, perfume, and cold sweat. Elena found a corner away from everyone, near a rack of old stage props. She placed her hands on a dusty velvet curtain, feeling the texture, trying to ground herself. She could hear the muffled sounds from the hall, the polite applause, the first powerful chords of a Rachmaninoff concerto being unleashed by the first contestant. The sound was huge, even through the walls. It vibrated in her chest. Her tremere would be a whisper after a shout. One by one, the others went out. She saw flashes of them through the side curtain as they took their bows, confident, smiling, relieved it was over. Some looked exhilarated, others slightly disappointed. The boy with the carefully messy hair came backstage, his face flushed. "Nailed the cadenza," he said to a friend, pumping a fist. His friend, a violinist waiting for a different audition, grinned and slapped his back. Elena's name was called. A stage manager with a headset gave her a quick, impersonal nod. "You're on. Good luck." Her legs felt like they were made of wood. She walked through the dark wings and onto the stage. The light was blinding. For a second, she was completely disoriented. Then her eyes adjusted. Pierce Hall was vast. It seemed to stretch upwards forever, all dark red velvet and gleaming gold leaf. And it was full. Not packed, but the important seats, the first 15 rows, were occupied by the faces of her world. She saw Professor Thorne sitting stiffly in the third row, next to the stern-looking chancellor. She saw the trustees, wealthy patrons sipping from water glasses. And she saw her peers, the other students, scattered throughout, their expressions a mix of boredom, curiosity, and, in a few cases, barely concealed amusement. The piano on stage was a monster of polished black lacquer, a concert grand that looked like it could swallow the one from room 11B whole. It sat under a single, hot spotlight waiting. She walked towards it, the sound of her sensible shoes on the wooden stage floor echoing in the quiet. A polite, brief patter of applause followed her, the kind given out of obligation. It died quickly, leaving a silence that was thick with expectation. She reached the piano, adjusted the bench. It was too high. She lowered it and sat down. The bench was cold. She placed her hands in her lap, took a deep breath, and looked out. In that moment, every doubt, every mocking word, every sympathetic look from Professor Thorne crashed down on her. They were all here to witness her mistake. The scholarship girl who didn't know her place. The air felt too thin to breathe. Her fingers, usually so sure, felt numb and clumsy. This was it. She was about to play a lullaby for a room that wanted a symphony. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic, panicked rhythm that had nothing to do with Schumann. Then, as her eyes scanned the blur of faces, she did something instinctive. She didn't look at the professors or the students. She looked for the back. In the very last row, nearly lost in the shadow, she saw a single figure slip into a seat. It was her mother. She must have left work early. Her coat was still on, and she gave a small, almost invisible wave, her face pale but calm. The world seemed to right itself. The vast hall shrank, just a little. This wasn't about them. It wasn't for Thorne, or the chancellor, or the sneering boy from the common room. It was for the woman in the last row who had saved for 3 years for a piano. It was for her abuela and her fields of flowers. It was for the janitor who said it sounded real. It was for the girl in the too-short dress from the apartment that smelled of toast. She was not there to conquer. She was there to offer a gift. A small, carefully wrapped gift of a memory. She turned to the keys. The glossy black surface reflected a distorted version of her face. She lifted her hands. The silence in the hall deepened, becoming absolute. They were waiting for the storm. She would give them the quiet before the dawn. Her fingers touched the keys, and she began. The first note of Trumere floated out into the hall. It was so soft, so tender, that several people in the front row instinctively leaned forward. It wasn't a timid sound. It was a confident whisper, asking for their attention, not demanding it. She played as she had in room 11B when she was exhausted and thinking of her abuela. She played for the memory, not the audience. Her hands moved with a slow, liquid grace. She gave each note its full life, letting it sing and decay naturally, savoring the spaces in between. The famous melody unfolded not like a song being performed, but like a feeling being remembered in real time. She reached the middle section, the gentle swell, Under her hands, it didn't get louder so much as it became fuller richer, as if the heart of the memory was being uncovered. The sadness there was not sharp or bitter. It was a soft, acknowledging ache for something beautiful that was gone. And then, as the melody descended, it was like watching that memory gently slip away again, not with a crash, but with a sigh. She was unaware of the hall now. She was in the world of the piece. She felt the cool weight of the keys, the slight resistance, the way the sustained pedal blended the harmonies into a hazy, beautiful mist. The final chords came, one after the other, each one softer than the last, dissolving into the air like smoke. Her hands came to rest back in her lap. The last vibration from the piano strings faded into nothing. There was no sound. For a long, breathtaking moment, there was absolute, profound silence. It was a different silence than before. This was not an empty silence of waiting. This was a full, heavy, stunned silence. It was the sound of a room holding its breath, of a collective thought being interrupted. Elena looked up, blinking in the spotlight. The vast hall came back into focus. And then, it broke. It started with one person in the third row, an older trustee with silver hair. She wasn't clapping. She was simply dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. The man next to her, a stern-faced critic, let out a long, slow breath he seemed to have been holding and began to applaud, not wildly, but with deep, measured respect. Like a dam breaking, the sound followed. It wasn't the explosive, cheering applause for a technical feat. It was a rising wave of something warmer, more genuine. It was the sound of people being moved, not impressed. People were getting to their feet, not everyone at once, but in clusters. First the trustees, then the professors. Professor Thorne was still seated, his face unreadable, but his hands were pressed together, his fingers steepled to his lips as if in prayer. In the back, Elena's mother was on her feet, clapping with tears streaming openly down her face, not caring who saw. The other students, the ones who had mocked her, looked stunned. The boy with the messy hair was staring, his mouth slightly open. The girl with the ballet bun was clapping, her earlier expression of amused superiority gone, replaced by something like dawning understanding. Elena stood up, her legs shaky. The wave of sound, the applause, the few scattered bravos, washed over her. She gave a small, stiff bow, her mind still somewhere far away in the fields of the music. The spotlight was hot on her skin. She had done it. She had made them listen to a whisper, and in the ringing silence she had created, they had finally heard her. The applause didn't really stop. It followed her off the stage, a roaring ocean in her ears that faded only to a muffled, persistent buzz as the heavy door closed behind her. Backstage was a blur of shadows and sharp light. The stage manager, the same one who had given her the impersonal nod, now looked at her with wide eyes and a thumbs up. Other contestants, waiting for their turn or having already played, stood in clumps. Their conversations died as she walked past. They didn't say anything, they just looked. It wasn't the old look of pity or dismissal. It was something new, something she couldn't quite name. She found her corner by the old velvet curtain and sank onto a wooden crate, her whole body trembling. The adrenaline was draining away, leaving her feeling hollow and light, like a shell. She could hear the next contestant begin to play a furious, brilliant torrent of Stravinsky. It sounded like noise now, all angles and fury. The magic spell of her own 3 minutes was broken, and the real world, with its rules and judgments, was rushing back, and she didn't wait for the results. She couldn't. The thought of sitting in that hall, under those stairs, was impossible. She gathered her things, her fingers fumbling with the simple clasp of her music bag, and slipped out a side door into a service corridor. The concrete was cool under her feet. She just walked, not knowing where she was going, just needing to be away from the sound of piano and applause. She ended up in the old practice wing. Room 11B was dark and silent. She stepped inside, closing the door on the world. In the familiar, musty darkness, with the faint outline of the stubborn piano, she finally let out a breath that felt like it had been trapped in her chest for weeks. She sat on the bench and rested her forehead on the smooth wood. She had done it. She had played it exactly as she felt it. Whatever happened next, no one could ever take that from her. It was late afternoon when she finally went home. The city felt different, softer. Her mother was already there, having left right after her performance. She didn't ask about the results. She just hugged Elena, a long, tight hug that said everything. They made dinner together, a simple meal, and didn't talk much about the audition. It was as if speaking about it might break the delicate, perfect memory of what had happened on that stage. The next morning, The conservatory felt charged, like the air after a lightning strike. Elena moved through the halls with her usual quietness, but now people didn't look through her. They looked asterisk at asterisk her. Whispers trailed in her wake, but they were different whispers. That was her. I've never heard anything like it. Thorne hasn't stopped talking about it. In her music history class, the professor, a usually dry man, paused at the beginning of the lecture. Before we discuss Baroque ornamentation, he said, adjusting his glasses, I feel compelled to remark on a rather extraordinary demonstration of musicality we witnessed yesterday, a reminder that volume and velocity are servants to expression, not masters of it. He didn't look at her, but everyone else did. The real test came at her weekly lesson. She walked into Professor Thorne's studio, her stomach a knot of old nerves. He was at his desk writing. He didn't look up for a full minute. The silence was heavy. Finally, he put down his pen and leaned back. He looked tired, but his eyes were clear and focused on her. The results were announced this morning, he said. His voice was neutral. You won the audition. You will perform Trumere with the National Symphony at the finale. The words landed, but they didn't feel real. They were just facts, floating in the air between them. She felt a distant jolt of excitement, but it was muffled by a deeper, more pressing need. She waited. He sighed, a long, slow exhalation. For 20 years, he began, not looking at her now, but at the portrait of Beethoven on the wall. I have taught students to build skyscrapers, to construct great, towering monuments of sound. I have taught power, precision, the conquering of technical mountains. He paused, his fingers steepled. Yesterday, you did not build a skyscraper. You planted a single, perfect seed, and in the silence you created, we all watched it grow into something profound. He turned his gaze to her. The dismissiveness, the patronizing patience, was gone. In its place was a stark, respectful honesty. I was wrong, not about the piece, but about what it requires. It requires not less of a musician, but more, a different kind of courage. You forced an entire room of cynical people to lean in, to listen with their hearts, not just their ears. That is a rarer gift than playing 1,000 perfect notes. He stood up and walked to the window. They will ask you to change it, you know. The conductor, the orchestra managers. They will say it is too short, too quiet for the hall. They will suggest additions. He turned back to her. Do not change a single note. Do not play it louder. Do not play it slower for more effect. What you did was complete. It was truth. And in music, truth is the only thing that ultimately matters. He was giving her permission. But more than that, he was giving her authority. The scholarship student was being handed the keys to her own artistic kingdom. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind, but a quiet one. There were fittings for a concert dress, a simple, long black gown provided by the conservatory, meetings with the stern, but now curiously respectful conductor, rehearsals in the vast, empty concert hall where she had to learn to trust that her whisper would carry to the very last row. Her peers no longer mocked her. They watched her. Some tried to befriend her, their curiosity outweighing their old prejudices. The boy from the common room even approached her once, shuffling his feet. That piece, I listened to it again last night. I never really heard it before. It was as close to an apology as she would get, and it was enough. The night of the final performance arrived. This time, there was no audition panel, no sense of being judged. The concert hall was packed, buzzing with the energy of 1,000 people. When she walked onto the stage, the applause was warm and generous. She saw her mother, this time in a better seat, her face glowing with pride. She saw Professor Thorne, nodding gravely. She sat at the magnificent concert grand, now a familiar friend. She looked out at the sea of faces, but she didn't feel small. She felt ready. She was not there as a poor girl, or a scholarship student, or an underdog. She was there as an artist, with a story to tell. She played, and once again, the hall fell into that deep, holy silence. The orchestra, a gentle hum behind her, held its breath. The melody, so familiar to her now, unfolded like a shared dream. This time, there was no shock, no surprise in the audience. There was recognition. They had come to hear the girl who played the quiet piece, and she gave them not just the notes, but the space around them, the feeling within them. The final chord faded. The silence held for a beat longer, a collective savoring, before the hall erupted. This was the storm of sound she had never tried to make with her fingers. It washed over her in waves as she took her bows, first alone, then with the conductor, then with the whole orchestra standing for her later. After flowers and handshakes and flashing cameras, she found herself back in room 11B, The celebration was going on in the main halls, the champagne flowing, but she needed quiet. She sat in the dark, the echoes of the triumph still singing in her veins. The door creaked open. Professor Thorne stood there, a silhouette against the light of the corridor. He didn't come in. He just looked at her, sitting at the old, buzzy piano. "You reminded us all why we started," he said, his voice quiet in the small room. "Thank you." He closed the door, leaving her alone with the silence and the piano. She smiled, a real, easy smile for the first time in a long time. She had come to this place to learn how to make music for the elite. Instead, she had learned how to make music that was human. And in doing so, she had found something far more valuable than their approval. She had found her own voice, and it was a voice that knew the power of a whisper.